Welcome, Ahmad, to the first of a number of conversations that I'm looking to have with some of my fellow large scale Scrum trainers. I wanted to start by saying it's an honour for me. I know I always say this to you, and you're probably sick of me hearing it, right? But I remember at the very beginning of my agile journey, coming across some of your writing and hearing about you, and being able to get to know you over the years has been an absolute honour. So to have you here today and to get to interrogate you a little bit about your less journey is something that I've been very much looking forward to. So thank you very much for obliging and coming along to this.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for the kind words. I appreciate it.
All deserved, all deserved. So if we could start by perhaps you sharing a little bit about your history, your experience, and kind of what and who you are and what you've done, just so we can let our viewers and listeners know.
Who I am and what I've done. I assume you mean just with specifically my career,
Perhaps,
but
but you can keep it as whatever you're comfortable sharing, Ahmad.
well, we'll start with career, and if you're interested in anything else, we can do that too. But so I started as a full-time software developer. I don't want to call myself an engineer. I wasn't an engineer back then. I did stuff with software at the age of 18. So I started full-time at a bank when I was 18 years old. And how I got there at 18 was that during the pre-dot-com bust, so around the late 90s, if you could spell HTML, you can get a job. And so I was a second-year engineering student at uni, and then found myself through a series of crazy coincidences working at Merrill Lynch, one of the biggest investment banks. And from there, jumped every year or so to different banks, basically trying to probably make more money, do more interesting things. And so by the time I was 21, 22, got married, and then thought that I should do what adults do and stop being a consultant and get a job, get a full-time job, and got a full-time job at 21, 22, and continued being a software developer, and had a lot of crazy experiences in that I was never qualified at all for the job that I got. I never was qualified for the job that I was interviewed for, but I had developed this belief that I could learn anything because of the first time I got a job. I was also very underqualified. So I got this confidence I can learn anything very quickly. And so many times I'd be given assignments that I actually did not know what those assignments meant or what they wanted or what the technology behind them, but I always believed I could learn very, very quickly. Fast forward, joined the company, started moving up the corporate ladder. And back then, if you remember, in the early 2000s, being a software developer was not a good thing. It was the whole offshore movement was in full swing, and it was it was viewed as a commodity. And the most important job you could get is a manager, whether it's a dev manager, if eventually becoming a project manager, program manager. That was the quickest path to director in a bank, at least. And so I took the advice of my manager, and he actually told me, get as far away from the technology as possible. Although I loved being a developer, but he said, this is not how you grow. You don't grow by being a developer. You grow by becoming a manager. And he was absolutely right for the context at that time. Offshoring was in full swing, and I did. I became a dev manager, became eventually a project manager, program manager. By the time I was 25, I was managing many, many, many people, and moved to London, became a Uber program manager, and was running strategic projects for Europe and the Middle East, and continued doing that. And until around 2005 or so, we hired, I'm saying my manager hired someone named Gordon Weir, who's just a brilliant change agent, one of the best change agents I've ever met. He's like this disruptive Kiwi person that I'd never seen anyone quite like him. Like
Mm.
there'd be a meeting, and he just walk into the meeting because he felt the meeting was interesting. He's just like a disruptive change agent, you know. And in the beginning, had become fully British at that point. I was like, you know, became annoyed and cynical. I'd lost all my American, you know, thing. I became fully British and saying like, who is this guy? What's up with this guy? And all this kind of, who does he
So what
think he
happens
is?
when you become fully British? You become cynical.
You become cynical and kind of angry, and you don't like Americans, or people say awesome, you know, things like that. But the reason I'm saying this entire backstory is it's at that point this guy Gordon brings in another guy who's Canadian and just unlike anyone I'd ever seen in my life, a guy named Craig Larman.
I've heard of him.
Yeah,
I've
you
heard
heard
of him.
Craig? And
Yeah.
so I had never heard of Craig. This is a long time ago. I mean, I want to say this is when Gordon brings in Craig. I think it's like 2008 or so, or around. So quite a long time ago. Brings in this guy with the bolo tie, and I was at that point part of an initiative to change the bank, to help change the bank, because as a program manager, we knew that these large scale software projects were not working. So we're looking for better ways of doing things. We had this like really amazing CIO coming from Goldman, and he was changing the culture, and it was like a great time. But we didn't know exactly how to change from, you know, dinosaur to this new way of working. So it was an amazing time for me because this is before like the agile revolution took over the world or ate the world. So I learned TDD from Uncle Bob. Mike Cohen was teaching us, you know, agile software, estimating and planning, and Goico was teaching us SBE and impact mapping while he was coming up with a lot of these ideas. Like, he was calling impact mapping something else, and it was a really
Effect mapping,
amazing
I think.
time. And Craig was one of these folks. He was calling it effect mapping. Um,
So is
and
that
so
so? It's interesting.
I
At the
had the
beginning
class
of
with Craig.
no, so I was going to say in the beginning of
Sorry,
the
go ahead.
impact mapping book, he calls it effect mapping, but then said that Craig came up with the name impact mapping. Was that
Yes,
maybe then during that period?
this is exactly during the entire period, right? And I I was really, really lucky and fortunate to be part of this little incubation period that was created by a really enlightened managing director named Lee Nichols and facilitated by this other guy named Gully Patel. And so the combination of these three folks, Lee, Gully, and Gordon, gave us a lot of air cover to try a lot of really great things. And for example, it was during this period that the team self-design pattern was born. And I could not have been able to do something like that had it not been for that kind of air cover and that kind of incubator that was created. But so I meet Craig, and the first thing we do with Craig is a training. There was no less. Less did not exist. It was Scrum as taught by Craig.
Mm-hmm.
And the acronyms less did not exist back then. At least it wasn't advertised. It was just normal CSM training, Craig. And I did not know you don't question Craig. You know, I didn't know Craig at this point. So I think I know my stuff. So I'm questioning him in class before I knew you're not allowed to really do that. So at one point in the class, he asked me like, so what is it that you do? And so I told him what I did, and he said, wow, what a wasteful job. And he's like, that makes me sad, in his very Craig way. And whereas that really bothers people, it actually did not bother me at all. Like I thought it was really interesting, you know. And why does he think my job is waste? And based on his own understanding of lean, it was not only waste, it was unnecessary waste. It was the worst kind of waste. And I became really impressed with not only his knowledge, but his ability to really disrupt. I mean, I'd never seen somebody so disruptive in positive ways and ultimately very negative ways as well. But I'd never seen somebody so disruptive. And then his lifestyle of minimalism and traveling really impacted me, and it resulted in me really shifting a lot, not just my career and quitting the bank, but how I travel and live with my family, etc. And then, so that's,
What
yeah, go ahead.
what a brilliant story! I don't think maybe apart from that dinner we had many years ago that I don't think I've really heard the story and I'd forgotten it since. So
Yeah.
it's brilliant.
Yeah. And then after that, I really almost, I think it was 2 years after meeting Craig that I quit and started doing this type of change work independently of the bank I was in. So that's a
And you've
long-winded answer to your first question.
uh,
I'll try
but it's a
to.
lovely.
Sorry, go
But
ahead.
look, it was a brilliant answer, and it was nice to hear. And it frames things really well because I think the one thing that I've, and maybe this isn't it wasn't one of the questions that I was going to ask or one of the things I was going to say, but it's always struck me that between you and Craig, there's a great deal of respect, like mutual respect.
Yeah.
And I think that, at least from an outside perspective looking in, I've always seen that you two have a seemingly like great relationship, and I'm guessing that comes from part of a journey that you've been on.
I think it's because we've worked together and he's seen me do things, I've seen him do things, and there is a relationship that gets forged when you actually work on something together, as opposed to just having a mentor-mentee relationship, or he's Craig and I'm Ahmad. So we've worked together, he's seen me do things, I've seen him do things, and you develop a deeper bond that way. And I remember when I first met him, I was one of the many hundreds or thousands of people that he's met, and it was kind of like, all right, you could tell he had zero interest. And until I tried, he saw that I was taking some of the ideas that were at that point theoretical even, or he had heard had happened, and I was actually attempting them. And this, to tie things back, comes back to my early days as a software engineer. I'm willing, I have this belief I can learn and try things very quickly. And so when in the class he mentions that I think it was China, someone tried to get people in a room and form themselves, we tried it. And so he was actually really surprised that we attempted it. And I remember him telling me, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm about to get on a plane to Ireland." And he said, "Okay, by the time you land, I want a draft of what happened." And so, just like, even though I don't work for him, I'm like, "Yes, Craig, it will happen." Sure, Craig. So yeah. And then he's also developed, he's become a very trusted mentor to me since then.
It was the team self-design work that's when I first came across you, and probably the first time I came across Craig as well. But I think it was you stuck in my mind more. I don't know why, but I mean that initial article really, was I read it, and then as soon as I could afterwards, I was there trying to practice it.
Yeah.
I did some research on it a few years back and found that the earliest, and maybe there are earlier recorded events like this, but the earliest I could find was a Lancaster bomber cruise in World War II.
Yeah.
And I find that's even as much as I dislike kind of war stories, it's their sentiment is brilliant. And when I always hold that in my mind, and I hold yours and Craig's work in my mind whenever I'm going to go and do one of these events, because I think it's always served me very well.
Yeah, it's really, it's been 10 years or so since I wrote that article, and 11 years since the actual event, or something like that. And you realize that even before the bomber cruise, we grew up that way. When we play basketball, it's all self-selected. We don't have it's very intuitive. And the reality is, I don't know if it is better to self-select or have a manager select. And so, for example, if you go into the Premier League or any professional football club, the teams are not self-selecting. You have a manager selecting. And so what I've learned in experimentation is that I nor almost any agilist truly knows if what they're doing is better than the alternative. It's all kind of gut feeling, anecdotal, that kind of thing. So although it's my my minor claim to fame, the team self-selection has been tried many, many times. I don't have any real data that says this approach is better than if a manager selects the team.
I mean, I think that's something that maybe we could get another
Yeah.
conversation scheduled in for, because I've been studying team coaching, and you listen to some of the people that are kind of leading the charge on professional team coaching, and they'll say that team coaching is in the pre-theory stage,
Yeah.
and they're still looking back to feel like family therapy and group therapy and counselling, and trying to draw things from other academic research to pull into team coaching to find what is transferable. And the one thing that I was on this course with my friend Philly Lander, and the one thing we began to realize was, we're in the agile world, we've tried a lot of the things for a long time, but there's never been any rigorous data collection. We've never taken a en masse, that, as far as I'm aware, there's never been a proper rigorous academic approach applied to what we've done. And I think that actually we've got a huge amount of anecdotal information.
Yeah.
But I wonder if it will get picked up by academia, and there will be some real solid research done into some of the things that we observe as being beneficial.
Yeah, exactly. Even things that we hold as sacrosanct, like XP and the work of Kent Beck, that really was just an experience report that he wrote from his time in Chrysler. I tried this, I tried that, I tried this, I tried that, and it was codified in this thing called XP. And people view that, or user stories, or things like TDD, or as better, and we actually don't know if they're better. Just because Uncle Bob and other people say this is better, or I say team self-selection is the better way of creating teams, we actually don't know, or we can't, other than faith and our gut and anecdotal evidence, say for certain any of this stuff is better or more effective.
I mean, and this is what I find very interesting, and we'll move on to some of the other questions I want to ask you in a second. But what I find really interesting is I was going through the Less book again, the third one, recently, and at the very beginning it says that the principles and the frameworks are sacrosanct. We would ask you to follow those, but when it comes to the guides and the experiments, actually, if they don't fit and they're not bringing you improvements, then don't use them or change them. And then when you begin to look really and say, well, hold on, how much of the types of things that people say, well, that's absolutely less, how much of it is just a guide? Right? And I think I've been guilty in the past of it, espousing things as sacrosanct when actually it's a guide. And in that respect, less is very, very malleable. And I just find it interesting how I think the lines are blurred, and people tend not to take that stuff away from less, which is, if there's a guide and it doesn't fit, it's not bringing you improvement, then don't do it. Like find another
Exactly.
way.
And that's just a measure of maturity, and that what's a guide, what's not. And the way I think about this is the less rules, and people quote the less rules like it's biblical. And even to me, the less rules are guides, and
Yeah.
And I know when I break the rules and when I should break the rules. And the way in which I think about it is, I remember when I first did my first triathlon and my coach sent me the plan. I treated the plan like I could not miss a session, as if I'm like an Olympic athlete, and I'm not. I'm an amateur. And my coach, Iron Mike, would send me something, and I would say, okay, I'm sorry, no matter what's happening, how I feel, I need to go swimming on Tuesday because it's in the thing. Now, been doing this for 15 years. I know exactly what to break, when not, what's an essential session, what's not an essential session. So I think the rules and less are really important to an organization beginning a journey. But then, in my opinion, and this is only my opinion, this is not probably the opinion of Craig or Bas, almost every rule is meant to be broken.
I would be inclined to agree. There's a client that I have been working with, and they're incredibly complex environment. This is not. This is one of those environments where you look at it and you think, like, how is this ever going to work? And actually with them, what they found was actually just looking at using Scrum well and factoring in a few of the less rules. So not all of them, just taking a look at them and say, okay, well, which ones are we going to go for and which ones are we going to say later? And actually, they came up with a really nice approach, and they seem to be doing very well with that. And they're saying, okay, well, then at some point in the very near future, we're going to tick a few more boxes. We're going to bring a few more of those on, and we're going to get used to them as well.
Yeah,
But there is a very complex environments. You know, you can't. There's only so much change that we can take, or the system can take.
exactly. And there's like there are benefits to be gleaned from a lot of parts of less. It's like someone who's not willing to go vegan but wants to eat a lot more plants in their diet. Okay, they might not be vegan, but there is benefit for them having a lot more plants in their diet. And maybe in some cases you can't call some of the adoptions less, but you can take a lot of goodness from less.
Yeah. It reminds me of my really clumsy story, which I told it well once, and then have really failed to tell it well ever since. Your vegan one's much nicer than the one that I'll briefly share with you. But mine was always about Pumping Iron, the Arnold Schwarzenegger film.
I've seen it.
Yeah. And I watched Pumping Iron. I'm like, that's what I'm going to do. Man. Like, I want to look like that. That's what I need. I need to do everything they're doing. And then so I was going to the gym a lot, and I just kept on hurting myself all the time. And it took me years to realize that actually, maybe if I just took on bits of what they're saying, maybe if I looked at the diet, or maybe if I looked at the types of exercise they were doing, or if I built up to it slowly, then maybe, do you know what? I'm never ever going to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but maybe I can feel happier and healthier, and maybe there's some things I can pick up, and then I'm on a brilliant journey. And this is what I will then say to clients: is say, well, look, like the less rules and the less frameworks. That's Arnold Schwarzenegger. You're never going to look like that. But what can you begin to pick up and use along the way? And then you can make more useful decisions for you as you're on that journey to however you will look.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting analogy. I mean, is less and its rules and suggested experiments, are they even achievable? Because Arnold Schwarzenegger like physique is achievable to a very, very small. It is achievable, even greater than his physique, but very, very small selection of humanity. Is less the same, where it's only achievable for a very small select percentage of corporations?
Wow. I mean, it's interesting. Even though only a subset can have that physique, no one's going to look exactly like Arnold Schwarzenegger. You know, this is part of, we're all different.
Yeah, and what's the analog or equivalent to, organizational steroids to even be able to? Like, what is that? Maybe cocaine. I don't know.
Well, let's move. Looking at the news in the UK at the moment, there's a lot that could be said for that comment, but we'll move on perhaps. Right, there are some questions I'd like to ask you.